Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. So today, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin in 2025.
Okay.
Specifically, you're curious about the iShares Bitcoin Trust.
IBIT.
Yeah, and why there's so much buzz around it.
Right.
I mean, we've got Wall Street analysts throwing out some pretty wild predictions this year.
Yeah.
Some even saying it could jump as high as 140%.
Wow.
So if IBIT mirrors those gains well,
Mm-hmm.
that's something worth exploring, right?
Absolutely. And we've got a great source to help us unpack all of this.
Okay.
An article from the Motley Fool.
Okay.
They paint a really interesting picture of where things could be headed.
Do they point out that Bitcoin already had a pretty stellar 2024
Oh, yeah.
with returns hitting 119%?
Wow.
That's
Leagues beyond.
leagues beyond almost every stock in the S&P 500.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that Wall Street's starting to sit up and take notice.
Right.
But what's fascinating is that some of these analysts aren't just taking notice, they're making some really bold predictions.
Wow.
The article highlights three in particular.
Okay.
Matthew Siegel from Vanek,
Okay.
Gautam Chugani from Bernstein, and Tom Lee from Fundstrat Global Advisors.
Okay.
So Siegel's predicting Bitcoin will hit $180,000.
Wow.
Chugani's going for $200,000.
Okay.
And Lee's topping out at $250,000.
Wow. Those are some seriously optimistic.
Yeah,
Ooh.
very optimistic.
Yeah.
And it's not just the numbers themselves that are interesting.
Right.
It's who's making these predictions.
Exactly.
These aren't just like random Bitcoin enthusiasts.
Yeah.
These are seasoned analysts from well-respected firms.
Absolutely.
They've got track records, they've got methodologies,
Mm-hmm.
and their opinions carry weight on Wall Street.
For sure.
But to your point, those numbers are eye-popping.
They are.
A $250,000 Bitcoin would be a 130% gain from where we are now.
Yeah.
That's a gain that can make a real difference in someone's portfolio.
Absolutely.
And that brings us back to IBIT. I think it'd be helpful to kind of explain exactly what IBIT is and how it fits into all of this,
Yeah.
especially for those who might be newer to the world of Bitcoin.
Sure. So IBIT stands for iShares Bitcoin Trust.
Okay.
And it's what's known as an ETF or exchange-traded fund.
Got it.
Think of it as a basket of assets, in this case all Bitcoin, that you can buy and sell just like a stock on the stock market.
Okay.
What's great about IBIT is that you can invest in Bitcoin through a familiar platform like your regular brokerage account.
Right.
You don't have to mess around with cryptocurrency exchanges or worry about the complexities of storing your Bitcoin yourself.
So essentially, IBIT provides an entry point for investors who might be a bit hesitant to kind of dive into the cryptocurrency Wild West.
Exactly. And IBIT's popularity seems to support that.
Yeah.
Just look at its first year. It hit $10 billion in assets, faster than any ETF in history.
Really?
And then blew past that by reaching $50 billion even quicker.
Wow.
Clearly, there's a huge appetite for a more traditional way to invest in Bitcoin.
Okay, so we've got these massive predictions for Bitcoin's future. We've got an ETF that's making history, and we've got you, our expert, to help us kind of connect the dots.
Right.
The question is, why are those analysts so optimistic? What's got them so bullish on Bitcoin?
There are a couple of major factors at play, and the article does a good job highlighting them.
Okay.
The first, and arguably the biggest game changer, was the SEC's approval of spot Bitcoin ETFs
Right.
in early 2024.
Yeah.
This was a huge moment for the entire cryptocurrency market,
Hmm.
and it directly ties into why IBIT is seeing such success.
I remember when that news broke, it felt like everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
But I'll admit I didn't fully grasp the significance at the time.
It's understandable. It was a pretty complex development with
Yeah.
far-reaching implications
Okay.
before spot Bitcoin ETFs.
Mm.
Even IBIT wasn't an option.
Oh, really?
You see, investors still had to go through specialized cryptocurrency exchanges
Right.
to get exposure to Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be a barrier for a lot of people.
Especially for more traditional investors.
Yeah.
Or institutional investors.
Uh-huh.
Like hedge funds, pension funds.
Right.
Who are used to dealing with regulated markets and familiar platforms.
Exactly. But spot Bitcoin ETFs changed all that.
Okay.
Now with ETFs, like IBIT investors can buy and sell shares that track the price of Bitcoin directly
Ah.
without actually owning any Bitcoin themselves.
Okay.
They can do it all through their regular brokerage accounts.
Got it.
It essentially removed a huge barrier to entry
Yeah.
for a whole category of investors.
So that's why it's such a big deal.
Exactly.
It opened the floodgates for institutional money to flow into Bitcoin.
Mhm.
And of course, more demand often means higher prices.
Precisely. Now, the other major factor the article mentions
Okay.
is the potential for regulatory shifts.
Right.
We know Gary Gensler, the current SEC chair, is stepping down.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of speculation about what that means for the future of cryptocurrency regulation.
Right. The rumor mill is churning. Some are saying a new administration under Donald Trump could usher in a more crypto-friendly era.
Yeah.
And then there's Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act, which is still on the table. If that were to pass, the U.S. government would actually become a major Bitcoin holder.
Wow.
Imagine the signal that would send to the rest of the world.
It's definitely a fascinating possibility and one that's worth unpacking further.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
we should probably acknowledge that these are just possibilities, not guarantees.
Right.
We can't predict the future.
Yeah.
And the regulatory landscape is notoriously unpredictable.
Good point. It's important to temper those what-if scenarios with a healthy dose of reality.
I mean, for sure.
And speaking of reality, the article does offer a word of caution amidst all this optimism.
Yeah.
They point out that Bitcoin is still a relatively young and volatile asset. There are no guarantees of future gains, and sharp drops are possible, even likely.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding your own risk tolerance comes in. What might feel like an exciting roller coaster for one investor could be a terrifying freefall for another.
Right.
It's all about aligning your investment decisions with your personal financial goals and your comfort level with risk.
For sure.
So it's important to...
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's true. Understanding your risk tolerance is absolutely key.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears a bit and dig a little deeper into those potential regulatory shifts we touched on earlier.
Okay.
Particularly Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act.
Okay.
It's been generating a lot of buzz, and for good reason. Imagine if the U.S. government, one of the most influential economic forces in the world, were to start holding Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset.
That would be a monumental shift, wouldn't it?
It would.
It would send a huge signal of legitimacy to the global market and could potentially fuel even more adoption.
Exactly.
It's almost like a stamp of approval from the highest authority.
Exactly. And it ties into one of the core arguments in favor of Bitcoin, that it offers a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty. If the U.S. government were to officially embrace Bitcoin, it could legitimize that argument on a global scale.
It's mind-boggling to think about the potential ripple effects. But like you said earlier, we need to be realistic. The Bitcoin Act still faces significant hurdles. There's a lot of debate and uncertainty about its future.
And it's important to consider the potential downsides as well. Some critics argue that government involvement could stifle innovation in the cryptocurrency space. They worry about overregulation and the potential for government control to hinder the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, which is one of its core appeals.
That's a valid concern. Too much government interference could definitely backfire. It's a delicate balance between fostering innovation and ensuring responsible development. I guess only time will tell how this all plays out. But one thing's for sure, the regulatory landscape is going to continue to be a major factor driving Bitcoin's future.
Absolutely. Now let's circle back to IBIT.
Okay.
And connect those potential regulatory shifts to its performance.
Okay.
Remember BlackRock, the company behind IBIT, is a major player in the institutional investment world. They manage trillions of dollars for pension funds, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, you name it. They're deeply embedded in the networks where these large-scale investment decisions are being made.
And if those institutions start to see Bitcoin as a more legitimate and regulated asset class, thanks in part to something like the Bitcoin Act passing, BlackRock is perfectly positioned to capitalize on that shift,
Precisely. They've already got the infrastructure in place.
They've
got the trust of institutional investors, and they've got IBIT ready and waiting as a vehicle for those investors to gain exposure to Bitcoin in a way that aligns with their regulatory requirements and risk profiles.
So IBIT isn't just riding the wave of Bitcoin's potential. It's positioned to be a driving force in that wave. And if those analysts' predictions about Bitcoin's price are even remotely accurate, holding IBIT could be a pretty smart move. But we've talked a lot about the potential upsides. What about the potential downsides? The article does mention Bitcoin's volatility, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the risks associated specifically with IBIT.
Of course. So while IBIT offers a more accessible and regulated way to invest in Bitcoin, it's important to remember that it still carries the same inherent risks as Bitcoin itself.
Right.
The price of IBIT is directly tied to the price of Bitcoin, meaning if Bitcoin crashes,
Yeah.
so does IBIT. And as we've discussed, Bitcoin has a history of experiencing significant price swings.
Right. That makes sense. It's not a magic bullet that eliminates risk.
Mm.
It's simply a different way to gain exposure to Bitcoin with all its potential rewards and risks.
Exactly. And there are a few other things to consider as well.
Okay.
One is the expense ratio. Like any ETF IBIT charges a fee.
Right.
For managing the fund, it's a relatively small fee.
Okay.
But it's something to factor into your overall investment strategy.
Right. And it's worth remembering that IBIT is just one of many ways to invest in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
There are other ETFs out there, as well as the option to buy and hold Bitcoin directly through a cryptocurrency exchange.
Absolutely.
Each approach has its own advantages and disadvantages. So it's important to do your research and choose the path that aligns best with your individual needs and goals.
I could have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And speaking of different perspectives, let's take a step back for a moment.
Okay.
And acknowledge that not everyone is as bullish on Bitcoin as those analysts we discussed earlier.
Right.
There are valid criticisms and concerns that are worth exploring as well.
I was just thinking about that. We were focusing a lot on the optimistic side of things, but I think it's crucial to consider the counter-arguments as well.
Absolutely.
To get a balanced perspective, so to speak.
To get the full picture.
Yeah.
One of the most common criticisms you'll hear is that Bitcoin is a speculative bubble with no intrinsic value.
Okay.
Critics point to its volatile history, the lack of widespread adoption for everyday transactions,
Right.
and the fact that its value is primarily driven by market sentiment and speculation.
I could see where they're coming from. Bitcoin doesn't have the same kind of tangible assets or cash flows
Right.
that back up traditional investments like stocks or bonds.
Yeah.
Its value is largely determined by what people believe it's worth,
Right.
which can be a pretty shaky foundation, especially in a market as unpredictable as cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and then there's the energy consumption issue,
Right.
which has been a source of ongoing debate. The process of mining Bitcoin, which is how new coins are created and transactions are verified, requires a significant amount of computing power.
Yeah.
And therefore energy.
Right.
Critics argue that this is unsustainable and harmful to the environment.
I've heard about that as well.
Yeah.
It's definitely a valid concern, especially as the world becomes more focused on sustainability and reducing carbon emissions.
Right.
It's something to consider when weighing the potential benefits of Bitcoin against its potential drawbacks.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the world of cryptocurrency is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
New technologies are new regulations are being implemented, and new use cases for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are being explored.
Right.
What might seem like a valid criticism today could be addressed by innovation tomorrow.
That's a good point. It's a dynamic space, and it's important to stay informed and adaptable.
It is.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Uh-huh.
I want to make sure we're leaving our listener with some actionable takeaways. What are some key questions they should be asking themselves as they consider IBIT or other Bitcoin investments in light of everything we've discussed?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to really understand how Bitcoin works.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just kind of hear about its potential gains.
Right.
You need to understand the underlying technology, the factors that drive its price, and the risks involved.
Absolutely. Once you have kind of a solid grasp of Bitcoin itself, then you can start exploring different investment options like IBIT.
Right.
But even then, it's crucial to ask yourself, does this investment align with my risk tolerance?
Yes.
And my overall financial goals?
Absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right.
What might be a suitable investment for one person could be completely inappropriate for another.
Right. And speaking of different approaches, I think it's worth taking a moment to compare Bitcoin's historical performance to other more traditional asset classes.
Okay, like stocks or bonds.
That's a great point. We've talked a lot about Bitcoin's potential, but how does it actually stack up against the investments people are more familiar with?
Well, over the long term, Bitcoin has significantly outperformed traditional assets.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that Bitcoin is a much younger asset class.
Right.
Its history is relatively short compared to stocks and bonds, which have been around for centuries.
So it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right. It's more like comparing a speedboat to a cruise ship.
Oh, great.
The speedboat might be much faster.
Yeah.
but it's also much more susceptible to choppy waters.
Right.
Bitcoin's volatility makes it difficult to compare directly to assets that have a much longer and more stable track record.
That's a really helpful analogy.
Yeah.
So while Bitcoin might offer the potential for greater returns, it also comes with a greater level of risk.
Exactly. And that brings us back to IBIT.
Okay.
While it provides a more accessible entry point into the Bitcoin market, it doesn't eliminate that inherent volatility. If Bitcoin's price plummets, the value of your IBIT shares will plummet as well.
So even with IBIT, it's essential to have a clear investment strategy, a solid understanding of your risk tolerance, and a long-term perspective.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, this is just a snapshot of the current landscape.
Right.
The world of cryptocurrency is constantly changing new regulations, new technologies, new applications. All of these factors can influence the future of Bitcoin and investments like IBIT.
Yeah, it's a dynamic space, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating.
It is.
But it also underscores the importance of staying informed and adapting your investment strategy as the market evolves.
Absolutely. And beyond just staying informed, I encourage you to stay curious.
Okay.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring different perspectives, and keep learning.
Yeah.
The more you understand about Bitcoin, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions that align with your financial goals.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We
explored the bullish predictions for Bitcoin in 2025, the factors driving that optimism, the potential risks involved, and the specific considerations for investing in IBIT.
Absolutely. We've also highlighted the importance of doing your own research, understanding your risk tolerance, and aligning your investment decisions with your personal financial goals.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Imagine a world where Bitcoin's potential is fully realized.
Okay.
A world where it's not just a speculative asset,
Yeah.
but a widely accepted form of currency, a driver of innovation, and a force for financial inclusion.
Right.
How might it reshape our understanding of value and our relationship with money?
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
And as you continue to explore the world of Bitcoin and IBIT, keep that broader perspective in mind. It's not just about potential profits. It's about the potential for a fundamental shift in the way we think about and interact with money in the digital age.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
Thanks for having me.
Till next time, happy investing.